Hello everyone. Today we are revising government contracts, and honestly, this is one of those units that looks difficult because it has constitutional provisions, but once you understand the logic behind it, it becomes very easy. Let us start with a simple question. Suppose I want to buy a laptop from you. We agree on the price, shake hands, and the contract is formed. Now imagine, instead of me, the government wants to buy 1,000 laptops for a public project. Can any government employee simply sign a paper and bind the government? Of course not. And that's exactly what the constitutional contains, a special rule for government contracts. This brings us to the most important provision of this entire unit, that is Article 299. If you are going into the exam, remember one thing. Article 299 is the king of this unit. Almost every important answer somehow comes back to it. Now the Constitution says that a government contract should be expressed in the name of the President in case of the central government, or the governor in case of the state government. But that's not enough. The contract must also be executed by a person who has proper authority. And it must be made in the prescribed form. So instead of memorizing long provisions, remember three words: name, authority, and form. If these three things are present, you are already halfway through the unit. Now you might ask, why is Article 299 so strict? Imagine if every government officer could walk around signing contracts on behalf of the government. The public treasury could be exposed to huge losses. That's why the Constitution insists on safeguards. And the court had repeatedly said that these requirements are mandatory. A useful case to remember here is State of Bihar versus Karam Thapar. The important principle from this case is simple. Article 299 is mandatory, no, not optional, not merely procedural, mandatory. Now let's move to another important area. Suppose the government causes damage to someone. Can the government be sued just like an ordinary person? At first glance, you might think yes, but the answer is a little more complicated one. And that brings us to one of the most important distinctions in this unit: sovereign function and non-sovereign function. Let's understand this through example. Defense of the country, maintenance of law and order, military operations, these are sovereign functions. These are activities that only the government can perform. On the other hand, imagine running a transport service, operating a commercial undertaking, or managing activities that private entities can also perform. These are generally treated as non-sovereign functions. Why is this distinction important? Because courts have often treated government liability differently in these two situations. Now let's discuss a very famous case, State of Rajasthan versus Vidyawati. The facts are easy to remember. The government vehicle was being driven negligently. An accident occurred and a person suffered loss. The question before the court was, can the government be held liable? The court said yes. Why? Because this was not a sovereign function like defense or policing. It was an ordinary activity. The principle to remember is, government can be liable for negligence in non-sovereign functions. Now let's look at another famous case which often gets paired with Vidyawati. Kasturi versus State of Uttar Pradesh. In this case, property had been taken into police custody. Later, there was issue regarding its handling and loss. The court took a different view and did not impose liability in the same way because the act were connected with sovereign function. And this is why students remember the two cases together: Vidyawati liability and Kasturi no liability. You don't need to remember every factual details, just remember the principle. Now let's come back to government contracts themselves. One of the favorite exam question is, what is the difference between a government contract and an ordinary private contract? The answer is simple. A private contract is governed mainly by the Indian Contract Act, and a government contract is governed by the Contract Act plus constitutional requirements, especially Article 299. That's the extra layer, and that's why government contracts are treated differently. Before we finish, let's do a quick revision. If a question comes on government contracts, start with Article 299. Then explain the three essentials: name, authority and form. After that, discuss government liability. Then explain sovereign and non-sovereign function. And finally mention the important cases: State of Bihar versus Karam and Thapar, State of Rajasthan versus Vidyawati, and Kasturi versus State of Uttar Pradesh. If you write these points with the case laws, you will already be ahead of many students in the examination. And before you go, tell me in the comments which concept was easier to understand today: Article 299, government liability, or sovereign versus non-sovereign functions. In the next revision, we will cover the remaining important topics of Contract 2. Thank you for watching and all the best for your exams.